The galaxy had a way of sorting species, not by intelligence, not by culture, not by the beauty of their homeworlds or the poetry of their languages. The galaxy sorted by teeth, by claws, by the tonnage of warships parked in orbit and the willingness to use them. Humanity had none of these things, or rather humanity had so little of these things that the difference between having them and not having them was a rounding error. 47 colony worlds, a defensive fleet that could generously be called adequate, no enslaved species, no conquered territories, no history of orbital bombardment. In the math of the galactic dominion, this made humans a footnote. Ambassador Elera Voss knew all of this as her shuttle drifted toward Thraxas Station, the beating heart of Dominion governance. Only a structure so large it had its own weather systems and so old that entire civilizations had risen and collapsed since its first corridor was welded into place. She sat in the back of the diplomatic shuttle with her hands flat on her thighs and her spine pressed hard against the seat like she was trying to fuse with it. She was 43 years old, brown hair cut short because she could not be bothered with it, a face that had been called plain by people who did not look closely enough and striking by people who did. She wore the dark blue formal suit of Earth's diplomatic corps, and pinned to her left lapel was a small silver circle, the emblem of her homeworld. Just a circle. No eagle, no sword, no predator with bared teeth. A circle. And the other species had found this hilarious when humanity first showed up on the galactic stage 11 years ago. Her aide, Commander Rourke, sat across from her. He was built like a man who had been assembled from spare military parts. Wide shoulders, jaw like a shelf, eyes that tracked movement the way anti-aircraft systems tracked incoming ordnance. He had not spoken in 40 minutes. This was because he had nothing to say, and Rourke was the kind of man who treated silence like a natural resource he refused to waste. The shuttle passed through the outer defense ring of Thraxas Station. Elera counted the weapons platforms, 48, each one capable of turning a small moon into gravel. She looked at Rourke. How many of those are pointed at us right now? He did not look up from his datapad. All of them, Ambassador. Lovely. The shuttle docked. The airlock hissed. The smell hit first, recycled air that had been breathed by 10,000 species and carried the faint chemical tang of atmospheric scrubbers working overtime. Thraxas Station smelled like a hospital waiting room the size of a continent. Their escort was already waiting. 4 Thraxian soldiers in black armor that looked like it had been grown rather than manufactured, with helmets that hid everything except their eyes. Pale yellow, slit-pupiled, cold as winter on a world that had never heard of spring. The Thraxians were the top of the food chain, 7 feet tall on average, scaled skin in shades of dark gray and deep blue, 4 arms, 2 legs, a skeletal structure that made them functionally impossible to wrestle, grapple, or pin down. And they had conquered 62 species in the last 1,000 years. They ran the Dominion the way a landlord runs a building, with just enough maintenance to prevent collapse and just enough threat to prevent complaint. The lead soldier looked down at Elera. Way down. Ambassador Voss, that's me. You will follow. Love the hospitality. Rourke's hand twitched at his side. Not toward a weapon. He was not carrying one. No human was permitted weapons on Thraxas Station. His hand twitched because his body remembered what it was like to reach for something that was not there, and the absence of it made his fingers itch like a phantom limb. They walked. The corridors of Thraxas Station were built for Thraxian proportions, which meant the ceilings were high enough to echo and the doorways were wide enough for 4 humans to walk abreast. Everything was gray metal and pale blue lighting. No art, no decoration, no windows. The Thraxians did not believe in beauty as an architecture. They believed in function and the fear that function implied. Other species watched them pass. A cluster of Elani, small, insectoid, translucent, pressed themselves against the wall as the Thraxian escort moved through. A pair of Torvathi merchants, 8-legged and heavily furred, stopped their conversation and stared at the humans with something that might have been curiosity or might have been pity. It was hard to tell with Torvathi. Their faces did not move the way human faces moved. Elera kept her eyes forward. She had been briefed. She had been briefed so thoroughly that the briefing documents printed out would have required their own shuttle. She knew the names of every Dominion Council member. She knew their political alignments, their personal grudges, their mating histories, and their preferred methods of execution for enemies. She knew the floor plan of the council chamber. She knew where the exits were. She knew there were no exits. Not really. Not for humans. Not here. The council chamber was a vast circular room with tiered seating that rose in concentric rings around a central platform. The petitioner's floor. The design was intentional. Anyone who stood on that floor was surrounded, looked down upon, small. Elera stepped onto it and felt the weight of 1,000 eyes. The council was already seated. 12 species, 12 delegations. 8, but only one mattered. High Commander Dravik of the Thraxian Empire sat at the apex of the highest tier, directly across from the entrance, positioned so that every petitioner who entered would see him first and see him last. He was old by Thraxian standards, which meant he had survived long enough to kill everyone who had tried to replace him. His scales had faded to a pale silver gray, and his 4 arms rested on the armrests of his seat with the casual weight of someone who had not been afraid of anything in a very long time. He looked at Elera the way a man looks at a fly that has landed on his dinner plate, not with anger, not with hate, with mild inconvenience. "Ambassador Voss," he said. His voice filled the chamber without effort. Thraxian vocal cords were built for carrying across battlefields, but even his conversational tone sounded like a command. "You have requested an audience to discuss the matter of your border colonies." "I have. You have 5 minutes." Elera looked at him. She looked at the council. She looked at the translators embedded in every seat, carrying her words to 1,000 ears in 100 languages. She looked at the recording devices. This would be broadcast. They always broadcast these things. The Dominion liked the galaxy to see how petitions went. It discouraged future petitions. She took a breath. "In the last 14 months," she said, "Thraxian military vessels have entered sovereign human space on 9 separate occasions. They have established forward operating bases on 3 worlds within our recognized borders. They have displaced human colonial populations, totaling 11,000 people. Would 2 of those displacements involve the use of force? 47 human citizens are dead." She paused, not for effect. She paused because the number still had weight for her, and she needed a moment to carry it. "We have filed formal protests through every available diplomatic channel. We have filed 9. We have received 0 responses." A murmur rippled through the lower tiers. Not surprise, amusement. A few of the smaller delegations exchanged glances that said the same thing. "Oh, the little ones are complaining again." Dravik did not react. He sat motionless, patient, the patience of a predator who did not need to chase because the prey always came to him. "I am here," Elera said, "to deliver a message from Earth's United Council. This is not a request. This is not a negotiation. This is a warning." The chamber went quiet. Well, not the quiet of attention, the quiet of disbelief. A Thraxian sub-commander in the second tier barked a laugh. It sounded like 2 rocks being struck together. Elera ignored it. "Withdraw your forces from human space within 30 standard days. Return our displaced citizens. Compensate the families of the dead. If these terms are not met, Earth will consider the Thraxian Empire to be in a state of open war with humanity, and we will respond accordingly." Silence, then laughter. It started with the Thraxians and spread outward like a wave, rolling through the tiers of the council chamber until the entire room shook with it. Not all species laughed the same way. The Alani clicked, the Torvathi rumbled, the Kashiri whistled. But the message was the same. 47 colony worlds threatening the largest military empire the galaxy had ever produced. Elera stood on the petitioner's floor and waited. She did not flinch. She did not blush. She did not look away. She had known this would happen. She had been told in the briefing room on Earth 6 weeks ago that this was the most likely outcome. She had been told what came after, too. She had accepted the assignment anyway. Dravik raised one of his 4 arms. The laughter stopped, not gradually. It stopped like a switch had been thrown. The Dominion was well trained. "Ambassador Voss," His voice carried the residue of amusement, the way a blade carries the residue of oil. I appreciate your species' courage. It is an admirable quality in small creatures. But I must ask, do you understand what you are saying? Perfectly. You represent a species that has existed on the galactic stage for 11 years. You have no dreadnoughts. You have no planetary siege weapons. You have no history of interstellar warfare. Your total military capacity would not survive first contact with a single Varaxian battle group. He leaned forward. And you stand here and speak to me of war. I do. Then you are either very brave or very foolish. I've been told those are the same thing where I come from. Dravik studied her. Something shifted behind those yellow eyes. Not respect. That was too much to ask. But something. A flicker. The recognition that this small creature on the floor below him was not performing courage. She was holding it like a weapon, and she was holding it steady. Yana, your warning is noted, he said. It is also rejected. The territories in question are now under Varaxian jurisdiction. Your colonies will be relocated. If they resist, they will be removed. This is the order of the Dominion, and it is final. Elera nodded, slowly. Then I have one more thing to say, and I want to be certain the recording devices capture it clearly. She looked directly into the nearest broadcast lens. To the people of Earth, to every human being listening to this, I was sent here to offer peace. It has been refused. What comes next is not my decision. It is yours. But I want you to know, I am proud to have stood here. I am proud to have spoken for you. Whatever they do to me now, I need you to remember something. Dravik's eyes narrowed. Cool, we warned them. The silence that followed was different from the ones before. It was the silence of a room that has realized something is happening that was not in the script. Dravik stood, all 7 feet of him unfolded from that chair, like a monument deciding to take a walk, and the chamber seemed to shrink around him. What did you just say? Elera met his gaze. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs the way she had on the shuttle, and she held. I said we warned you. You presume to threaten this council? No, High Commander. I presume to tell the truth. What your council does with it is your business. What my people do with your answer is theirs. Dravik descended, step by step, tier by tier, until he stood on the petitioner's floor. He towered over her. His shadow swallowed her whole. Rourke was so hard the muscle jumped. Dravik reached so hard the muscle jumped. Dravik reached down with one of his lower arms and took the silver circle from Elara's lapel. He held it up, turned it in the light. A circle, he said. Your species chose a circle as its symbol. No weapons, no predators, no teeth. It represents a planet, Elera said. It represents nothing. He closed his fist. The pin crumpled. As will your species, Ambassador, if you continue down this path. He dropped the ruined pin at her feet. Escort the human delegation back to their shuttle. Their diplomatic credentials are revoked. They have 12 hours to leave Dominion space. Elera bent down. Whinnied from above. A Varaxian pulse weapon from above. A Varaxian pulse weapon, standard military issue, fired from the 2nd tier by a soldier whose name would never be recorded in any official document. The bolt struck Elera in the center of her back, and she dropped like someone had cut her strings. Rourke moved. He moved with the speed of a man who had spent 20 years in special operations and whose body did not need permission from his brain to react. He covered 4 meters in less than a second and was on his knees beside her before her body had finished falling. She was still alive. Barely. The pulse had burned through her spine and cooked everything behind her rib cage. She had seconds. Her hand found Rourke's. Her fingers wrapped around his, weak, trembling, and she pulled him close. She whispered something. 2 words. Rourke heard them. His face did not change. His face went to a place beyond expression, a place where grief and fury had merged into something that had no name in any human language. Elera Voss died on the petitioner's floor of the Dominion Council chamber, in front of 1,000 delegates in a live galactic broadcast, with a crushed silver circle in her pocket and 2 unrecorded words on her lips. Rourke stood. He lifted her body. He carried her back to the shuttle. No one stopped him. The Varaxian guards watched. The council watched. Dravik watched. None of them stopped him because none of them were afraid. Not yet. The shuttle departed Thraxas Station at 1400 Galactic Standard Time. It crossed the outer defense ring. It passed the 48 weapons platforms. It entered open space and set course for Earth. 12 hours later, every human communication relay in the galaxy went dark. Every embassy closed. Every trade route shut down. Every human ship recalled. Earth went silent. The galaxy barely noticed. A few trade partners filed complaints about disrupted supply chains. A Torvathi merchant guild sent inquiries about overdue shipments. The Alani Collective expressed mild concern through diplomatic backchannels. The Varaxians noticed least of all. They had more important things to attend to. A species with 47 colony worlds and no dreadnoughts had been put in its place. The ambassador had been made an example. The message was clear. There was nothing left to discuss. Dravik returned to his command center. Once he reviewed fleet deployments, he approved the next phase of expansion into human-claimed territory. He signed orders for the permanent military occupation of 3 more human colony worlds. He did not think about Elera Voss. He did not think about the 2 words she had whispered. He did not think about the silence. 3 weeks passed. The Varaxian 4th Fleet, 12 warships, 2 carriers, 800 crew, entered the Kepler Corridor, a stretch of space that bordered human territory. Their mission was routine: occupy, establish, pacify. They sent their standard arrival broadcast on all frequencies. No one answered. They moved deeper into the corridor. Sensors showed nothing. No ships, no stations, no orbital defenses. The human colonies in the region appeared to have been evacuated. Buildings stood empty. Ports sat vacant. And there was a signal, faint, coming from the stars. There was a signal, faint, coming from the far edge of the corridor. Not a distress call, not a beacon, a recording. On loop, Torath ordered it played. The bridge speakers crackled. A voice, human, female. "We warned you." Then every sensor on every ship in the 4th Fleet lit up at once, and the corridor filled with light, and Sub-Admiral Torath had exactly 1.5 seconds to understand what the silence had meant before the silence took him too. The 4th Fleet was never heard from again. On Earth, in a room buried deep beneath a mountain that had no name on any map, a woman with gray hair and steady hands looked at a screen that showed the Kepler corridor. She turned to the room full of officers behind her. "That's confirmed," she said. "They received the warning. They didn't listen." She straightened in her chair. "Begin." The galaxy ran on gossip the way engines ran on fuel. Inefficiently, constantly, and with a remarkable tendency to explode at the worst possible moment. The disappearance of the Varaxian 4th Fleet was not gossip. It was a hole in the fabric of galactic conversation. And holes were worse than gossip because people filled them with their own fears. Trade Minister Yelek of the Torvathi Merchant Guild was the first non-Varaxian official to notice something was wrong. Yelek was a creature of numbers: 8 legs, 4 eyes, and a brain that processed profit margins the way other brains processed oxygen, automatically, constantly, and with deep personal distress when the supply was interrupted. He sat in his office on Torvathi Prime, staring at a shipping manifest that had a blank space where the 4th Fleet's patrol confirmation should have been. "They're late," he said to his assistant. "By how much?" 11 days. His assistant, a younger Torvathi named Bryn, shifted on her legs. "All 8 of them. Varaxian fleets are never late." "I am aware." "Should we inquire?" Yelek looked at the manifest. He looked at the trade routes that ran through the Kepler corridor, routes that carried raw materials worth more than the annual output of 6 minor species combined. He looked at the empty column where arrival timestamps should have been. "No," he said. We should not inquire. We should listen, and we should listen very carefully to what we do not hear." On Thraxas Station, High Commander Dravik was doing something he had not done in decades. He was waiting. Varaxians did not wait. Waiting implied uncertainty, and uncertainty implied weakness. And weakness was a resource the Varaxian Empire had eliminated from its vocabulary 3,000 years ago, along with the species that had tried to teach it to them. But Dravik was waiting because the 4th Fleet had not reported in, and the 4th Fleet always reported in, and the absence of their report was a sound he could not identify. It was like hearing a note missing from a song he had listened to his entire life. He stood at the command display in his private war room aboard Thraxas Station. The display showed the galaxy, a sprawling, glittering map of territories and borders and fleet positions, color-coded by allegiance. Vraxian space was rendered in deep blue. It covered nearly a third of the known galaxy. The blue was so dominant that other colors looked like accidents, stains on a clean surface. Human space was gray, a small smudge near the galactic rim. 47 worlds, barely visible at this scale. The Kepler corridor sat between the two colors, and on the display, the Fourth Fleet's position marker had gone from active blue to inactive black. Black meant no signal, no transponder, no life signs. Druvik's second-in-command, Fleet Admiral Korath, stood behind him. Korath was younger, sharper, and possessed the particular kind of ambition that made him dangerous to everyone, including himself. For he had 4 scars running down the left side of his face, 3 from combat, 1 from politics. He did not specify which was which. Equipment failure, Korath said. The Kepler corridor has high-density radiation pockets. It could interfere with transponders. All 12 ships? Korath did not answer. All 12 ships, Korath. 2 carriers, 800 crew, every transponder, every backup, every emergency beacon, all dark, simultaneously. The alternative, High Commander, is that they were destroyed. Yes, by the humans. Yes. Korath let out a breath that was half laugh, half disbelief. The humans do not have the capability to destroy a patrol fleet. Their entire navy could not match our Fourth Fleet ship for ship. Dravik said nothing. He stared at the black dot on the display. He was thinking about the ambassador, the woman who had stood on the petitioner's floor with shaking hands and a steady voice and said words that no species with 47 worlds and no dreadnoughts had any right to say. We warned you. He had killed her for it. Not personally. He had not given the order, though he had not punished the soldier who fired, which amounted to the same thing in the mathematics of power. He had killed her because her words were an insult, and insults from lesser species could not be permitted to stand. This was doctrine. This was tradition. This was how the Dominion maintained order. But he was thinking about her face. The moment before the shot, she had not been afraid. He had seen fear in 1,000 species. He knew its variations the way a painter knows shades of red. The Alani trembled. The Kashiri went rigid. The Torvathi curled inward. Every species had its signature, and Dravik had cataloged them all. The human ambassador had not been afraid. She had been sad. The distinction bothered him in a place he could not name. Send the 9th Fleet, he said. Full combat deployment. Find out what happened in the Kepler corridor. Korath straightened. The 9th Fleet is one of our largest battle groups. 32 ships. For a reconnaissance mission? I did not say reconnaissance. I said full combat deployment. Against humans. Dravik turned from the display. He looked at Korath with eyes that had watched empires fold. Against whatever is in that corridor. The 9th Fleet departed Vraxian staging grounds 4 days later. 32 warships, 4 dreadnoughts, 12,000 crew. On enough firepower to crack a planet's crust and enough soldiers to occupy whatever was left. They entered the Kepler corridor in standard combat formation. Dreadnoughts at the center, heavy cruisers on the flanks, destroyers running point. Their sensors were at maximum range. Their weapons were hot. Their shields were up. Fleet Commander Voxan was a veteran of 11 campaigns and the destruction of 2 species that had made the mistake of resisting Vraxian expansion. She was considered one of the finest tactical minds in the Empire. She had never lost a battle. She had never even come close. She sat in the command chair of her flagship, the Dominion's Wrath, and watched the corridor unfold on her tactical display. Empty. Dark. The stars out here were thin and scattered, and the space between them felt wider than it should. And the scan results, she said. Nothing, Commander. No ships, no stations, no orbital infrastructure. The human colonies in this sector have been completely evacuated. Debris? Scanning. A pause. There is debris, Commander. Vraxian alloy signatures. scattered across a region approximately 400,000 kilometers wide. Voxen leaned forward. The Fourth Fleet? Confirmed. Hull fragments consistent with Thraxian warship construction. We are also detecting. The sensor officer stopped. His scales shifted color, a pale wash that meant something was wrong with his body's ability to process what his instruments were telling him. Detecting what? The debris is pulverized, Commander. Not broken, not breached, pulverized. The largest fragment is less than 2 meters across. And whatever did this reduced 12 warships to particles. The bridge went silent. Not the trained silence of military discipline. The raw silence of creatures confronting something that did not fit inside the architecture of their understanding. Voxen's tactical officer spoke. Commander, I'm detecting the same signal the Fourth Fleet reported before contact was lost. A looped recording. Human origin. Play it! The bridge speakers crackled. The same voice. The same 2 words. We warned you. Voxen opened her mouth to give an order. She never finished. The first shot came from nowhere. Not from a ship, not from a station, not from any direction the sensors could identify. It came from the fabric of the corridor itself, as though the darkness between the stars had learned to bite. And it struck the lead destroyer amidships with a beam of energy so dense that the ship did not explode. It collapsed, folded inward like a paper ball being crushed in a fist. Then the second shot, the third, the fourth. Evasive! All ships evasive! Voxan roared. The fleet scattered. 32 ships breaking formation, engines at maximum burn, weapons firing into the dark at targets they could not see. Plasma bolts and kinetic rounds and particle beams lit up the corridor in a mad constellation of firepower aimed at nothing. The shots kept coming. They came from angles that were impossible. They came from behind ships that had nothing behind them. They came from above and below in a dimension that space did not have. Each one struck with surgical precision. Engines first, then weapons, then life support. Not random, methodical. The work of something that was not panicking, not improvising, not reacting. Hunting. Voxan watched her fleet die on the tactical display. Ship after ship went from blue to black. The dreadnoughts lasted longer. Their shields held for almost 90 seconds before the beams cut through. But they died the same way, folding, collapsing, going dark. Get me a target, she said. Her voice was controlled. Even the voice of a woman who had decided that if she was going to die, she was going to die doing her job. Anything. Give me something to shoot. Commander, there's nothing on sensors. Whatever is firing at us is not registering on any detection system we have. That's impossible. Yes, Commander. A beam hit the Dominion's wrath. The ship shuddered. Lights flickered. The hull screamed. A sound that metal makes when it is being asked to do something metal cannot do. Hull breach. Decks 7 through 12. Shields at 14%. Voxen looked at her display. Of 32 ships, 9 remained. 8. 7. The numbers felt like a countdown. Open a channel, she said. All frequencies. Unencrypted. Channel open. This is Fleet Commander Voxan of the Thraxian 9th Fleet. I am addressing the human forces in the Kepler corridor. We acknowledge your military presence. I am requesting a ceasefire to discuss terms. Silence. Another ship died. 6 remaining. I repeat, ceasefire request. We are willing to negotiate. The speakers crackled. A voice, human, male, calm in the way that deep water is calm. Not because there is no current, but because the current is so far down that the surface cannot feel it. Fleet Commander Voxan, this is Admiral Chen Wei of the United Earth Navy. Your ceasefire request is noted. Then ceasefire. I'm afraid I can't do that. Another ship. 5 remaining. Voxen's claws dug into the armrests of her chair. We are prepared to withdraw. Fully, immediately, we will leave the corridor. The corridor is not the issue, Fleet Commander. Then what is the issue? A pause. The kind of pause that carries weight. You killed our ambassador. That was not my decision. That was not my fleet. I had no part in. You are Thraxian military. Your empire killed our ambassador on a live broadcast in front of the entire galaxy. You used her death as a message. Another pause. We received it. 4 ships. 3. Admiral, please. Fleet Commander, I want to be clear about something. We are not angry. Anger fades. What we are is something your species doesn't have a word for, because you have never had to develop one. You have never been the small thing. You have never watched your people be killed by something larger and known you couldn't stop it. You have never buried your dead and been laughed at for mourning them. 2 ships, the Dominion's Wrath was one of them. We have a word for it, though. In English, the closest translation is resolve, but that doesn't capture it fully. It's resolve mixed with patience, mixed with memory, mixed with the understanding that the universe doesn't care about fairness, and so fairness must be built by those willing to bleed for it. The other ship vanished from the display. 1 ship, the Dominion's Wrath. Elera alone. Your fleet is destroyed, Commander. Your ship is the last one standing, and I have left it standing deliberately. I need you to survive. I need you to go back to Thraxas Station, and I need you to deliver a message to High Commander Dravik. Voxen's scales had gone white, not from fear, past fear. Her body had run out of the chemicals required to sustain it, and had entered a state that Vraxian biology reserved for terminal situations. A cold, clear, empty awareness. What message? Tell him that was the first. Tell him there will not be a third warning. Tell him Earth is coming, and when we arrive, we will not be sending ambassadors. The channel went silent. The Dominion's Wrath drifted in the dark, surrounded by the pulverized remains of 32 warships and 12,000 Vraxian soldiers. Anatan Fleet Commander Voxan sat in her chair and breathed and did not move for a long time. Then she ordered a course for Thraxas Station. The journey took 6 days. In those 6 days, the galaxy changed. Not visibly, not in the way that wars usually announce themselves, with explosions and headlines and refugee convoys streaming across borders. The galaxy changed the way a patient changes when the doctor's face goes wrong. Something in the air, something in the silences between transmissions, something in the way the Alani stopped answering trade hails, and the Torvathi began quietly rerouting shipping lanes away from anything that bordered human space. Trade Minister Yellick noticed. He noticed because the numbers told him, and numbers did not lie, and the numbers were saying that money was flowing away from the Vraxian side of the galaxy like water draining from a cracked pool. He called an emergency session of the Merchant Guild. Something has happened in the Kepler corridor, he said. I do not know precisely what, but 2 Vraxian fleets have entered that corridor, and neither has returned. The humans have gone completely silent. Every human trade relationship, every human diplomatic channel, every human cultural exchange in the galaxy has been terminated. They have withdrawn entirely. Withdrawn where, Matbrin? Home. Why? Yellick looked at his assistant with all 4 eyes. Because they are not traders anymore, Bryn. They are not diplomats. They are not colonists. He paused. They are something else now. And I do not want to be standing in the corridor when we find out what. On the other side of the galaxy, on a world called Threshold that sat at the edge of human space like a door left ajar, something was happening that the galaxy's sensors could not detect because the galaxy had never thought to look for it. Factories. Thousands of them. Not on the surface. Underground, buried beneath kilometers of rock and ice, invisible to orbital scans. They had been there for years, not 11 years. Not since humanity had joined the galactic stage. Longer. Earth had been preparing. Not for this war specifically. Earth had been preparing for the possibility of this war, the way a person living in a bad neighborhood installs locks and cameras and learns to sleep with one eye open. Not because they want trouble, because trouble does not ask permission. The factories built ships, not warships, not in the way the galaxy understood warships. These were something different, smaller, faster, carrying weapons that operated on principles the Vraxians had not encountered because the principles were not derived from Vraxian science or Vraxian physics or anything in the Vraxian database. They were derived from human physics, from human mathematics, from the particular kind of innovation that occurs when a species knows it is small and surrounded, and decides that the appropriate response is not to grow bigger, but to grow stranger. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the observation deck of the UEN Remembrance, the flagship of the fleet that did not officially exist, and looked out at the assembly point where 300 ships hung in the dark like a constellation that had decided to move. 300. Not the 47 world defensive fleet the galaxy knew about. That fleet was real, and it was exactly what it appeared to be. Adequate, unremarkable. The fleet the galaxy was supposed to see. This fleet was the one they were not. Chen Wei was 61 years old, thin, gray at the temples, a face that had been weathered by 30 years of military service into something that looked less like a face and more like a landscape. Ridges and valleys and the deep lines that form around the eyes of people who have spent too long looking at things they cannot change. When he held a small object in his hand, a silver circle, crushed, bent, the pin that had been taken from Elera Voss's lapel and returned with her body. He had known Elera, not well. They had met twice, once at a diplomatic function, once at a briefing where she had been told what would happen if the Thraxians rejected her terms. She had listened. She had understood. She had gone anyway. The two words she had whispered to Rourke. He knew what they were. Everyone in this room knew what they were. Rourke had delivered them personally, standing in this very room, with Elara's blood still on his uniform, his voice flat and empty and carved down to its foundations. She had said, "Don't stop." Chen Wei closed his fist around the pin. He turned to his command staff. 12 officers, each one responsible for a division of the fleet that the galaxy had spent 11 years not knowing about. They stood around the tactical table, and their faces carried the particular expression of people who have crossed a line and know they cannot cross back. "The Ninth Fleet has been neutralized," Chen Wei said. "Commander Voxen survived as planned. She is en route to Thraxas Station. She will deliver our message." "And when Dravik receives it?" asked Captain Torres, his tactical operations chief. "He will do what every Varaxian commander has done for 3,000 years when faced with a problem. He will send a bigger fleet, a much bigger fleet. He will commit significant resources to crushing what he still believes is a minor threat. Why? Because his entire worldview depends on the belief that size determines outcome." Chen Wei placed the crushed pin on the tactical table. "He is wrong." "When do we move?" Torres asked. "When they come. We let them come. We let them commit. We let them extend their supply lines and spread their forces and plant their flag in the corridor and feel confident that they have the situation under control." He looked at the display. The 300 ships, the weapons that didn't follow Varaxian rules, the crews that had been training for this in the dark for a decade. "And then we go through them, and we don't stop until we reach Thraxas Station." Torres looked at the pin on the table. "For the ambassador?" Chen Wei shook his head, slowly. "No, for every species in this galaxy that has ever stood on that floor and been laughed at. Oh, for every small thing that was crushed because it was small, the ambassador knew what she was doing. She bought us something with her life." "What?" "Justification." He turned back to the window. 300 ships, silent, waiting, patient in the way that deep water is patient. She gave us the right to do what we were always capable of doing, and she made sure the galaxy watched. Far away on Thraxas Station, Fleet Commander Voxen's lone ship limped through the outer defense ring, damaged, scarred, the only survivor of 32. She was escorted to the council chamber. She walked to the petitioner's floor, the same floor where Elera Voss had stood, the same floor where Elera Voss had died. Dravik looked down at her. "Report." Voxen looked up at the High Commander. She looked at the council. She looked at the place on the floor where a human woman's blood had been cleaned away, but whose ghost still stood there, shaking and steady and sad. "They are coming," Voxen said. Her voice broke on the second word. "They are coming, and they are not what we thought." The Varaxian Empire had destroyed species before. It was not something they discussed at diplomatic functions, though it was not something they denied either. The destruction of a species was simply a tool, like fire, useful, occasionally necessary, not something that required moral examination any more than a surgeon examined the morality of a scalpel. The Cathani had been first, 800 years ago, a gentle silicon-based species whose crime had been occupying a star system rich in the rare minerals the Varaxian war machine consumed. They had been asked to leave, and they had refused. They had been removed. Their homeworld was now a mining colony. Their language existed only in academic databases. Their music, apparently they had created extraordinary music, was lost entirely. The Thraxians had learned something from the Cathani and from every species they had broken since. They had learned that destruction was easy when the numbers were on your side, and the numbers were always on their side, and therefore destruction was always easy. This was the foundational logic of the Thraxian Empire, and it had worked without exception for 3,000 years. Dravik was about to discover why foundations are the most dangerous thing to trust. He stood in the war room and looked at Voxan, who stood on the floor below him. Its sensors could not locate the source. Our sensors could not locate the source. Our targeting systems could not lock. Our shields could not calibrate because they could not identify the energy type. New technology, not new the way we use the word, not an improvement on existing systems. Something entirely different. Something that does not operate on the same principles as anything in our database. Dravik's lower arms crossed behind his back. His upper arms rested at his sides. Four-armed body language was complex, and this particular configuration meant he was processing something that required all of his attention and none of his emotion. How many ships did they deploy? Unknown. Estimate. I cannot estimate what I could not detect, High Commander. Korath, standing in the corner, let out a sound that was half growl, half calculation. She panicked. The fleet encountered an ambush, possibly mines, possibly stealth drones, and she panicked and lost 32 ships to a trap that a competent commander would have. I lost 32 ships in 97 seconds. Voxan's voice cut through the room like something with a blade. She turned to Korath, and her scales had gone the color of old iron, and her eyes held something that Korath had never seen in them before, because he had never seen it in any Thraxian before. It was humility, the forced, broken kind that comes not from wisdom, but from having been shown, with absolute clarity, the exact dimensions of your own irrelevance. 97 seconds, Fleet Admiral. I timed it. From the first shot to the last, 97 seconds. 4 dreadnoughts, 28 support vessels, 12,000 crew, 97 seconds. I did not panic. There was not enough time to panic. The war room absorbed this. Dravik turned back to the display. The map of the galaxy, the blue of Thraxian space, the gray smudge of human territory, the black void of the Kepler corridor where 2 fleets had gone to die. Mobilize the Grand Fleet, he said. Korath straightened. High Commander? The Grand Fleet. All of it. Every dreadnought, every carrier, every warship capable of faster-than-light travel. Pull them from patrol routes. Pull them from border defense. Pull them from the occupation garrisons. I want every ship we own pointed at human space within 14 days. That would leave our borders undefended. Our borders are not under threat. The humans are. High Commander, if the other species see our borders undefended, they will do nothing. They never do anything. They watch. They wait. They write concerned letters through diplomatic channels. This is what prey does, Korath. It hides and hopes the predator is busy with something else. Dravik's eyes locked onto the gray smudge. We are going to be very busy. The Grand Fleet assembled. It was the largest military mobilization in Thraxian history, a statement that carried weight when your history stretched back 3 millennia and included the subjugation of 62 species, 412 warships, 87 dreadnoughts, 30 carriers, with 200,000 crew, enough firepower to sterilize a star system, enough soldiers to occupy a civilization. They gathered at the edge of the Kepler corridor, like a storm building on the horizon, and their presence was felt across the galaxy the way earthquakes are felt. Not as a local event, but as a tremor that runs through the floor and reminds everyone standing on it that the floor is not as solid as they believed. Trade Minister Yelik watched the fleet movements from his office on Torvathi Prime and felt all 8 of his legs go cold. They've pulled everything, he said to Bryn. Border garrisons, patrol fleets, the occupation forces in the Alani system, everything. For the humans. For the humans. Bryn processed this. The humans have 47 colony worlds. Yes, the Grand Fleet could destroy 47 worlds in a week. Yes. Then why does this feel wrong? Yellick looked at her. In the decades he had known Bryn, she had never asked a question that did not have a number attached to it. This question had no number. It had a feeling, and feelings were not Torvathi currency. Because, he said, the humans knew this would happen. They destroyed 2 fleets. They knew the response would be the Grand Fleet. They knew the Varaxians would mobilize everything. A species that has been on the galactic stage for 11 years does not pick a fight with the largest empire in the galaxy unless they have already calculated the outcome. What outcome? Yellick said nothing. The Grand Fleet entered the Kepler corridor on the 15th day. Mudravik commanded from the bridge of the Imperial Sovereign, the largest warship ever built by any species. 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that could crack moons, carrying a crew of 8,000. He had given one order: destroy everything human, not occupation, not subjugation, destruction. The humans had forfeited their right to exist as a galactic species when they destroyed 2 Varaxian fleets. This was not punishment. It was pest control. The corridor was empty, as before. Dark, silent. The pulverized remains of the 4th and 9th fleets drifted in clouds of metallic dust that caught the distant starlight and glittered. Dravik looked at the glitter and felt something he had not felt in a century. Doubt. He crushed it. He had crushed doubt before. It was a reflex. Formation Alpha, he ordered. Full sensor sweep. I want every cubic kilometer of this corridor mapped before we advance. The fleet spread out. 412 ships casting their sensors into the dark like fishermen casting nets, searching for the invisible thing that had killed their kin. They found nothing. For 6 hours they found nothing. The corridor was empty. No ships, no weapons platforms, no mines, no stealth drones. Nothing. They've retreated, Korath said. He was aboard the Imperial Sovereign, standing at Dravik's shoulder, and his voice carried the particular confidence of a man who had decided to be right, because being wrong was not something he was willing to afford. They struck from ambush, and now they have retreated to their colonies. Classic prey behavior, hit and run. Dravik did not respond. High Commander, our sensor sweep is complete. With the corridors clear, we should advance to the first human colony world. Dravik looked at the display. The corridor, the stars, the dark. They let Voxan live, he said. Korath blinked. What? 32 ships, 12,000 crew, all destroyed, except Voxan. 1 ship, 1 commander, left alive. Why? To send a message. Yes, but what message? Not fear. If they wanted fear, they would have destroyed everything and let the silence speak for itself. They left a witness. They wanted us to know what they could do. They wanted us to come. The bridge officers looked at each other. They wanted us to bring the Grand Fleet, Dravik said. They wanted every ship we have in one place. The realization moved through the bridge like a cold wind. High Commander, it's a trap. Alarms. Every alarm on every ship. Simultaneously. A sound so vast and so layered that it became something beyond sound. A physical pressure, a vibration in the bones. They came from everywhere. Not from the corridor, not from ambush positions, from fold space. A method of faster-than-light travel that the Varaxians had theorized about, but never achieved because the energy requirements were beyond anything their physics could produce. The humans had not only solved the physics, they had weaponized it. 300 ships materialized in a sphere around the Grand Fleet. Not in front of it, not behind it, around it. A shell of warships that enclosed 412 Varaxian vessels in a bubble of coordinated death. The human ships were smaller than Varaxian dreadnoughts, less than half the size. But they moved with a synchronization that was not military. It was mathematical. Each ship occupied a precise position in the sphere, and together they formed a geometry that turned the corridor into a kill box with no exits. Weapons free, Dravik roared. All ships engage. The Grand Fleet opened fire. 412 ships unleashing everything they had in every direction. Plasma bolts, kinetic impactors, particle beams. The corridor turned into a storm of energy so bright that the optical sensors on every ship burned out simultaneously and had to switch to secondary systems. They hit nothing. The human ships moved. not dodging. There was nothing reactive about their movements, nothing that suggested they were responding to incoming fire. They moved the way the parts of a clock move, each ship shifting position in perfect coordination with every other ship, and the Varaxian fire passed through spaces that had contained targets a fraction of a second earlier and struck only darkness. Then the human ships fired back. The beams were the same as before, the unknown energy type that did not register on Varaxian sensors and could not be blocked by Varaxian shields. But this time, there were 300 sources instead of an unknown few, and they fired not in volleys, but in a continuous, sustained, interlocking pattern that covered every angle and left no gap. The Grand Fleet began to die, not in 97 seconds this time. The humans were taking their time. Dravik would realize later, much later in the cold hours of his survival, that they were being precise. When they were not trying to destroy the fleet as fast as possible, they were dismantling it. Engines first, then weapons, then shields. Each ship was being systematically stripped of its ability to fight, to flee, and to function in that order. It was not combat, it was surgery. Dreadnoughts, the pride of the Varaxian Navy, each one crewed by thousands, each one carrying enough firepower to flatten a civilization, went dark one after another. Their engines cut out, their weapons went dead, their shields collapsed. They drifted, intact but powerless, like insects pinned to a board. "They're not destroying us," Voxan said. She was on the bridge of her repaired ship, watching through a display that showed her own fleet being taken apart with the care of someone disassembling a machine they intended to study. They're disabling us." Dravik heard her over the fleet channel. He stood on the bridge of the Imperial Sovereign and watched his empire's military might be reduced to floating metal in the time it took to eat a meal. "Why?" he said. No one answered. The answer came 2 hours later, when the last Varaxian ship went dark and the corridor fell silent, and the 300 human ships held their positions in their perfect sphere and waited. A channel opened, all frequencies unencrypted. "High Commander Dravik, this is Admiral Chen Wei of the United Earth Navy." Dravik stood on a dead bridge. No power, no weapons, no engines. Emergency lighting cast everything in dull red. Water and the faces of his crew, the finest military personnel the Varaxian Empire had ever produced, looked like they had been carved from something that was no longer stone. "I hear you," Dravik said. "Your fleet is disabled, not destroyed. Your crews are alive. Your ships are intact but without power. We can restore that power or we can finish what we started. The choice is yours. What do you want? I want you to listen. For the first time in your empire's history, I want you to listen to a species that is smaller than you. Can you do that?" Dravik's 4 fists clenched, his jaw locked. Every instinct bred into him by 3,000 years of Varaxian supremacy screamed at him to refuse, to spit defiance, to die before bending. But 12,000 Varaxians had already died in this corridor. "Now escort your fleet back to Varaxian space. Escort your fleet back to Varaxian space. Every ship, every crew member, alive and unharmed. When you arrive at Thraxas Station, you will convene the Dominion Council. You will inform them that the Varaxian Empire will withdraw from every territory it has occupied by force in the last 100 years. Every species you have conquered will be freed. Every colony you have seized will be returned. Your military will be reduced to defensive capacity. Your empire ends today." Silence. "If you refuse, we will destroy the Grand Fleet. All of it, every ship, every crew member. And then we will move on Thraxas Station directly. And then we will move on every Varaxian military installation in the galaxy. And we will not stop until there is no Varaxian military capability remaining. We are capable of this. You have seen what we can do. You know this is not a bluff." Dravik closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, he saw the map. The blue of Varaxian space covering a third of the galaxy. 3,000 years of conquest. 3,000 years of dominance. 3,000 years of being the largest, the strongest, the most feared. Reduced to a choice on a dead bridge in a dark corridor by a species that had been on the galactic stage for 11 years. "How?" he said. The word came out broken, not a tactical question, an existential one. How did you do this? 11 years. You had 11 years. Chen Wei's voice was quiet. We didn't have 11 years, High Commander. We had all of human history. Every war we ever fought. Every time we were conquered and rose again. Every time we were told we were too small, too weak, too few. We have been preparing for you since before we knew you existed. Not you specifically, but something like you. There is always something like you. A pause. And one more thing. We did not develop this technology in 11 years. We developed it in secret over decades before we ever made first contact. We knew what the galaxy was before we entered it. We studied your transmissions for 50 years before we announced ourselves. We saw what you were. We saw what you did to the Cathani, to the Shoreth, to every small species that stood on your petitioner's floor and asked for mercy. Another pause. We did not come to the galaxy hoping for the best, Dravik. When we came prepared for the worst, and you gave us the worst when you killed Elera Voss. Dravik opened his eyes. Your term, he said. I need to hear them again. Full withdrawal from all occupied territories. Freedom for all subjugated species. Military reduction to defensive levels. Formal dissolution of the Dominion as a governing body. Establishment of a new galactic council with equal representation for all species. And one more thing. What? A monument on Thraxas Station, on the petitioner's floor, where Ambassador Voss died, a monument with her name and the names of every sentient being who was killed on that floor for the crime of asking to be treated as equal. Dravik said nothing for a long time. The emergency lights hummed, the corridor held its breath. If I agree to this, if I convene the council, if I deliver your terms, there are those in the Empire who will not accept them, who will fight. We know. You will face resistance, Thraxian resistance. We are not a species that surrenders. Neither are we, High Commander. That's the problem you're facing. You have met for the first time in 3,000 years a species that is exactly as stubborn as you are. The difference is that we are stubborn and we have better technology, and we have the moral high ground, and we have 300 ships around your fleet, and you have nothing. I could refuse to surrender. I could die here. My entire fleet could die here. That is also stubbornness. It is. And 200,000 Thraxian families would lose their children. For what? For pride? Your pride has cost enough, Dravik. It cost Elera Voss her life. It cost 12,000 of your own people theirs. How many more do you want to spend on it? The bridge was silent. The crew watched their commander, their high commander, the most powerful military leader in the galaxy, standing in emergency lighting on a dead bridge, being asked to end an empire by a voice on a speaker. Dravik reached into the folds of his uniform. He pulled out a small object, silver, circular, a pin, not Elara's pin, a replica. He had ordered it made after she died. He had carried it since, though he had told no one why, and if asked he would have said he did not know himself. But standing here, in the red dark, holding the crushed circle of a dead woman's world, he knew. He had kept it because some part of him, some ancient, buried, a pre-imperial part of his brain that still remembered what it was like to be a small thing in a dangerous universe, had known she was right. He put the pin on the dead console in front of him. Admiral Chen Wei. Yes, I accept your terms. Across the corridor, 300 human ships held their positions. None of them moved. None of them needed to. The news broke across the galaxy the way bones break, with a sound that everyone heard and no one wanted to identify. The Thraxian Grand Fleet had surrendered, not been destroyed, surrendered. The word traveled faster than light, bouncing from relay to relay, station to station, species to species, and every being who heard it had the same reaction, which was to hear it again because the first time could not possibly have been correct. The Thraxians did not surrender. The Thraxians had never surrendered. The Thraxians had a word for surrender in their language, but it was used exclusively to describe what other species did. Their own word for capitulation had been removed from military vocabulary 6 centuries ago. And yet, the Grand Fleet, 412 ships, 87 dreadnoughts, the single largest concentration of military power in galactic history, was being escorted back to Thraxian space by 300 human warships that moved in formation so tight and so precise that from a distance they looked less like a fleet and more like a single organism, a thing with 300 eyes and no blind spots. Trade Minister Yellick received the news in his office. He read it. He read it again. He set the datapad down. He picked it up. He set it down again. Then he looked at Bryn and said the only thing that a Torvathi who had spent his entire life believing in the predictability of numbers could say when the numbers stopped making sense. "Well, what does this mean?" Bryn asked. "It means the math has changed." "Changed how?" "It means the variable we assigned to humanity, minor species, limited capacity, negligible threat, was wrong. It was wrong from the beginning. And everything we calculated based on that variable is also wrong. Every trade model, every risk assessment, every strategic projection for the next century." He paused. "All of it, wrong." On Thraxas Station, the Dominion Council convened for what would be its last session, though most of the delegates did not know this yet. They arrived the way they always arrived, in order of importance. Air had laughed at Elera Voss sat in their seats and did not laugh. The representatives of 62 conquered species sat in their lower tiers and looked up at the Thraxians and saw something they had never seen before. Uncertainty. Dravik entered the chamber. He walked to the command platform at the apex. He stood there, and for a moment he was exactly what he had always been. The most powerful being in the room, in the station, in the galaxy. Then he opened his mouth and became something else. "The Thraxian Empire has accepted terms of surrender from the United Earth Navy." The chamber did not react, not because the delegates were composed, because the statement was so far outside the architecture of their reality that their brains needed additional processing time, the way a computer needs time to render an image that is too large for its memory. Then the noise, not laughter this time, something raw. 100 species making 100 sounds of disbelief, shock, terror, confusion, and, from the lower tiers, from the delegations of the conquered and the subjugated and the forgotten, hope. Hope sounds different from every other emotion. It is quieter, more afraid of itself, more likely to be mistaken for something else. A Cathani delegate, one of the last 700 Cathani alive in the galaxy, seated in the lowest tier because his species had been reduced to a rounding error, stood up. He was small, crystalline. It waver. He delivered the terms the way a waiver. He delivered the terms the way a surgeon delivers a diagnosis, with precision, without comfort, and with the understanding that the information itself was the wound. Full withdrawal from all occupied territories, every species freed. Military reduction, dissolution of the Dominion Council as a governing body, establishment of a new equal council, the monument. When he finished, Fleet Admiral Korath stood. "No." The word was a weapon. Korath held it like one. "No, High Commander. I reject these terms. I reject the authority of any alien species to dictate the structure of our empire. I reject the premise that a defeat in one engagement, even a significant defeat, invalidates 3,000 years of Thraxian supremacy. And I reject your leadership." He descended from his tier, step by step. His forearms were loose at his sides, and his body language was the Thraxian configuration for challenge. Open, aggressive, ready. "You were defeated by humans, Dravik. You were outsmarted by a species that has existed on the galactic stage for 11 years. This is not a failure of the Empire. This is a failure of command. Your command." Dravik watched him descend. His face gave nothing. "You surrendered our fleet without authorization from this council. You accepted terms that would dismantle everything our ancestors built. And now you stand here and ask us to ratify our own extinction?" Korath reached the council floor, invoking the right of challenge. "Korath invoking the right of challenge," Korath said. "Combat command transfer. If I defeat you, the terms are void. The fleet is mine, and we fight." The chamber went silent. The right of challenge was ancient Thraxian law, older than the Empire itself, rooted in the tribal warfare of their pre-spaceflight era. A direct challenge from a subordinate, to a superior, accepted by combat, won by death. Dravik looked at Korath. He looked at the floor beneath their feet. He thought about the human woman who had stood here, who had spoken truth to a room full of predators, who had been killed for it. "You want to fight," Dravik said. "So I want to lead. You want to lead the Empire into a war that will destroy it. I want to lead the Empire as the Empire, not as the neutered pet of a species that doesn't deserve its seat at this table." Dravik nodded. Not agreement, acknowledgement. He understood Korath. He had been Korath once, young, certain, fueled by the conviction that size and strength and will were enough to bend the universe. "Tell me, Korath, in the Kepler corridor, when our fleet was disabled, when our ships went dark, when 200,000 of our people sat in the cold and the silence and waited to find out if they would live or die, did you understand what was happening? We were ambushed. No, we were allowed to live. There is a difference, and the difference is everything. An ambush implies we had a chance. We did not have a chance. One could have destroyed us. They chose not to could have destroyed us. They chose not to. That choice is not weakness, Korath. It is the most terrifying thing I have ever witnessed." Korath's scales darkened. "You are afraid." "Yes." The word landed in the chamber like something dropped from a great height. "I am afraid. For the first time in my life, I am afraid. And I am afraid because I have seen what is coming, and you have not. You see a species with 47 worlds. I see a species that hid 300 warships with fold space capability for a decade while pretending to be harmless. I see a species that watched us for 50 years before making contact and chose to enter the galaxy as diplomats when they could have entered as conquerors. I see a species that sent an ambassador to be killed, and she went knowing she would die, because her death would give them the moral authority to do what they had the power to do all along." He paused. "And I see a species that, after all of that, after we killed their ambassador and laughed at their grief, still offered us terms, still gave us a choice. They could have destroyed the Grand Fleet. They didn't. They could have moved on Thraxas Station. They didn't. They could have done to us what we did to the Cathani, and no one in the galaxy would have blamed them." He looked at the Cathani delegate, the small crystalline figure standing in the lowest tier. "No one." Korath's fist clenched, all four of them. "So you would have us kneel. I would have us survive, and I would have us earn something we have never possessed. The respect of a species that is better than us. Not stronger, not larger, better. In the ways that matter when the weapons are put away." Korath moved, fast. Thraxian reflexes were built for killing. 3,000 years of natural selection and genetic optimization had turned their bodies into instruments of violence so refined that the movement from standing to lethal was measured in fractions of a second. His upper right arm swung, a strike aimed at Dravik's throat, a killing blow, the kind that ended challenges in the old way. Before the Empire, before the politics, when leadership was determined by the simple question of who was still breathing. Dravik caught the arm. Not blocked. Caught. His lower left hand closed around Korath's wrist with a grip that had been forged in a century of combat and tempered by something new. Something that was not strength, but certainty. The certainty of a being who had decided, in the red dark of a dead bridge, what he was willing to die for and what he was not. Korath's eyes widened. Dravik twisted. The joint bent in a direction Thraxian anatomy did not accommodate, and Korath went down. One knee, then two. His arm pinned behind him, his shoulder torqued to the edge of breaking, his body locked in a position that Thraxian culture had a word for, but no Thraxian had occupied in 600 years. Submission. "I could kill you," Dravik said. He stood over Korath holding the arm, speaking in a voice that the entire chamber could hear. "The right of challenge permits it. Tradition demands it. You raised your hand against your commander, and the punishment is death." He released the arm. Korath collapsed forward, breathing, alive. "But I have had enough of death. Haven't you?" Korath said nothing. He kneeled on the floor where ambassadors had died and challenges had been issued, and empires had been built. and he said nothing because there was nothing left to say that his position did not already express. Dravik turned to the council. The terms are accepted. The Thraxian Empire, as of this moment, is dissolved. The Dominion Council, as of this moment, is dissolved. I will work with the human delegation to establish the framework for a new governing body. Any species that wishes to participate is welcome. Any species that wishes to leave is free to go. He paused. Abu, we are done telling other species what to do. He stepped off the command platform. He walked to the lowest tier, where the Cathani delegate still stood. He descended to that level, the lowest level, the level reserved for the conquered, the level that no Thraxian had ever willingly occupied. He stood before the Cathani. The Cathani looked up at him, 7 feet of Thraxian looking down at 3 feet of crystal. The species that had destroyed and the species that had been destroyed, face to face, in a room that had witnessed 1,000 such meetings and had never once seen one end differently. Until now. I do not expect forgiveness, Dravik said. I do not ask for it. Your world was taken. Your people were killed. Your music was lost. Nothing I do will undo this. The Cathani said nothing. Light moved through his crystalline body. His color shifted. But if it is within your willingness, I would like to hear what your music sounded like. The Cathani looked at Dravik for a long time. Long enough for the chamber to go completely silent. Long enough for every delegate in every tier to stop breathing. Then he sang. It was not a sound that any other species could have produced. It was not vocal. It was vibrational. His entire body resonating at frequencies that human ears would have registered as somewhere between a harp and a thunderstorm, at once delicate and overwhelming. And it filled the council chamber the way water fills a glass. Completely, gently, and with the patience of something that had been waiting a very long time. He sang for 30 seconds, then he stopped. That is a morning song, he said. His voice, when he spoke rather than sang, was small and dry and precise. It is the last morning song. There is no one left who knows the others. Dravik said nothing. There was nothing to say. There were only things to do, and so he did them. Over the next 72 hours, the galaxy rearranged itself. Not with explosions, not with fleets, with paperwork and protocols and the quiet, exhausting labor of dismantling a 3,000-year-old power structure while building a new one from scratch. The human delegation arrived at Thraxas Station on the second day. Not Admiral Chen Wei. He remained with the fleet, the diplomatic team, led by a man named Rourke, Commander Rourke, former military aide to Ambassador Elera Voss, the man who had carried her body off the petitioner's floor, the man who had heard her last 2 words. He walked into the council chamber wearing the dark blue suit of Earth's diplomatic corps. Pinned to his lapel was a silver circle, not crushed, whole. He walked to the petitioner's floor. He stood where Elera had stood. He looked up at the tiers. They were empty. No one sat above him anymore. The tiered seating had been open to all species equally, and the delegates sat where they chose. And many of them chose to sit together in ways they never had before. Torvathi next to Alani, Kashiri next to former Thraxian subjects, enemies next to enemies, all of them looking at the human on the floor below. Rourke looked at them. My name is James Rourke. I am here as Earth's representative to the Provisional Galactic Council. I know that some of you are afraid of us. You watched what our fleet did in the Kepler corridor, and you are wondering if we are the next Thraxians, if we have simply replaced one empire with another. He paused. He had never been a diplomat. He had been a soldier. His words came out the way soldiers' words come out, blunt-edged, heavy, undecorated. I can't promise you we won't make mistakes. Humans make a lot of mistakes. We have a history full of them. We have done terrible things to each other and to our own world. We are not a perfect species. We are not even a particularly wise species. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a crushed silver pin, Elara's pin, the one Dravik had crumpled, the one she had picked up and put in her pocket before she died. He held it up. But we are a species that remembers, and what we remember most is what it feels like to be small. Every human alive carries that memory. It is in our stories, our songs, our bones. We were small on our own world. Prey animals in a world full of predators. We were small in our own history. Individuals crushed by empires, minorities erased by majorities, the weak consumed by the strong. He placed the crushed pin on the floor. Next to it, he placed his own pin. The whole one. Elera Voss came here to ask for peace. She was killed for it. She knew she would be. She came anyway. Not because she was brave, though she was. She came because she believed that the galaxy could be better than the Thraxians had made it. She believed that a room full of different species could sit together as equals and build something that did not require conquest. He looked at Dravik, who sat in the general seating now, at the same level as everyone else. It'd work. But I know that she died believing work. But I know that she died believing it could. And I know that the least we can do, all of us, every species in this room, is try. He straightened. Earth proposes the following charter for the new Galactic Council. And he began to read. It was not dramatic. It was not poetic. It was a legal document full of clauses and provisions and the tedious structural language that governance requires. Equal voting rights, proportional representation, military limitations, trade agreements, dispute resolution, environmental protections, cultural preservation, with a specific amendment regarding the recovery and reconstruction of lost cultural heritage, which everyone in the room understood was about the Cathani and did not need to be said explicitly. It took 3 hours to read. By the end, several delegates had fallen asleep, which Rourke privately considered the highest compliment a legal document could receive, because it meant the document was thorough enough to be boring, and boring governance was the only kind that lasted. When he finished, he opened the floor for questions. The first question came from the Eleni Collective representative, a small insectoid whose name translated roughly as patient click. What happens if a species violates the charter? Rourke looked at her. The Council addresses it through the dispute resolution framework outlined in Section 14. And if the dispute resolution framework fails? Rourke was quiet for a moment. Then Earth addresses it. The chamber absorbed this. You are proposing, Patient Click said, that Earth serve as the enforcer of galactic peace. I am proposing that no species should need enforcement. But if they do, yes, we have the capability, we have demonstrated it, and we would rather use it to keep the peace than to break it. That sounds like an empire. Rourke shook his head. An empire takes. We are not taking anything. We are not asking for territory. We are not asking for tribute. We are not asking for seats on the council beyond our proportional share. We are asking to be the thing that stands behind the door and makes sure nobody kicks it down. Patient Click considered this. Her antennae moved in patterns that, for Eleni, constituted deep thought. On the Thraxians stood behind the door for 3,000 years, she said, and they kicked it down themselves. Yes. How do we know you will not do the same? Rourke picked up the crushed pin from the floor. He held it in one hand. He held the whole pin in the other. You don't, he said. That's the honest answer. You don't know. You have our word, and our word is backed by our actions, and our actions are backed by the fact that we could have destroyed the Grand Fleet and didn't. But words and actions can change. People can change. Species can change. He put both pins in his pocket. The only thing I can tell you is that every human alive has been taught the story of Elera Voss. Every child on Earth knows her name. Every child knows what she did and why she did it and what happened to her. When every child knows the 2 words she said before she died. He paused. She said, "Well, don't stop." She wasn't talking about the war. She was talking about this, about building something, about standing in rooms full of species that are different from each other and finding a way to coexist. He looked at the chamber, at the Eleni and the Torvathi and the Kashiri and the Cathani and the Thraxians and all the others, sitting together at the same level for the first time in 3,000 years. Don't stop. That's what she said. And we won't. The vote was held the following day, 114 species, each one casting a single vote. The charter passed unanimously. Even the Thraxians voted yes. Not all of them wanted to. Korath, seated in the back, Hamas voted yes with the expression of a man swallowing medicine that he knew was necessary and hated for being necessary. His arm, the one Dravik had twisted, was in a medical brace, and he held his voting device in his lower left hand, and he pressed the button that said yes, and he did not look at anyone when he did it. Dravik voted yes from the front row. He pressed the button with the hand that had once crushed a silver pin, and when the tally appeared on the display and the number read 114 out of 114, he closed his eyes. Not in defeat, in something he did not have a word for. The Cathani delegate might have had a word for it. In their language, the language that existed only in fragments and databases, and in the memory of 700 survivors, there was a word that meant the feeling of watching something broken begin to heal while knowing that it would never be the same as it was before, but might somehow be better. The word had no translation, but the feeling filled the room. That evening, after the votes and the speeches and the endless logistics of remaking a galaxy, Rourke stood alone on the petitioner's floor. The chamber was empty. The lights were dimmed. The tiers of seating rose around him like the inside of a theater after the audience has gone. And the silence was the kind of silence that has texture, heavy, full, alive with the ghosts of everything that had been said in this room over thousands of years. He looked at the spot on the floor. They had cleaned it. Of course they had. But he knew where it was. What he would always know. He knelt, one knee on the cold metal, his hand flat on the floor. "We didn't stop," he said. His voice was quiet enough that only the room heard it, and the room kept it, and the ghost said nothing, and that was enough. 20 years passed. 20 years is not a long time by galactic standards. Species that measure their histories in millennia consider 20 years the way a human considers an afternoon. Present, felt, and gone before you've decided what to do with it. But 20 years was enough to change everything. The Galactic Council, the new one, the equal one, the one that met in a chamber with no tiers, had grown from 114 member species to 183. New species emerged from the far edges of the galaxy, was species that had hidden themselves during the Thraxian era because visibility meant vulnerability and vulnerability meant extinction. They came out of their dark corners and their hidden systems and their camouflage worlds, and they came to Thraxas Station, and they stood on the floor that was no longer called the petitioner's floor. It was called the speaker's floor now. The monument was there, set into the floor itself, flush with the metal, so that anyone who stood to speak would stand on the names. Elera Voss, and below her name, 3,217 others. Every sentient being killed on this floor by Thraxian order, stretching back across the centuries, their names recovered from archives and witness testimony and the careful, agonizing work of historical reconstruction. The Cathani delegate, the same one, on the last singer, had insisted that the names be in the native script of each species. This meant the monument was a patchwork of alphabets and symbols and marks that most beings could not read. It did not matter. The unreadability was the point. You did not need to read the names to understand what they meant. You needed only to stand on them and feel the weight. Trade Minister Yellick had retired 3 years after the charter was signed. His final act as a public official had been to publish a paper titled Revised Projections, Economic Implications of Galactic Equality, which was 400 pages long and could be summarized in one sentence. Everything the Torvathi Merchant Guild had believed about the relationship between military dominance and economic prosperity was wrong, and the new model was more profitable for everyone, including the Thraxians. The Thraxians. That was the surprise no one had predicted. Freed from the economic burden of maintaining the largest military in galactic history, a military that had consumed 40% of their gross domestic output, the Thraxian economy had not collapsed. It had transformed. The same industrial capacity that had built dreadnoughts now built infrastructure. The same engineering expertise that had designed weapon systems now designed terraforming equipment, medical technology, and, most improbably, musical instruments. The Cathani Reconstruction Project was a Thraxian initiative, proposed by Dravik himself in the first year of the new council, funded by the Thraxian treasury, staffed by Thraxian scientists and cultural anthropologists who spent their days piecing together the fragments of a civilization their ancestors had shattered. They could not bring back the dead. They could not restore the homeworld. It was still a mining colony, though the mines were being decommissioned and the first reforestation drones had been deployed. They could not recover the music, but they tried. Thraxian acoustics engineers, working from the resonance patterns recorded in the single morning song that Cathani delegate had performed in the council chamber, developed a theoretical model of Cathani musical structure. It was incomplete. It was probably wrong in ways they could not identify. But it was a start. Out in the Cathani survivors, all 712 of them, had wept when they heard the first reconstructed composition, not because it was right, but because someone had tried. Dravik did not live to see the project completed. He died 14 years after the surrender in his quarters on Thraxas Station of what Thraxian physicians called age-related systemic failure and what humans called dying of old age. He was the last high commander of the Thraxian Empire, and his death was quiet, and the galaxy noted it the way the galaxy notes the passing of something that was once enormous, with a mixture of relief and respect, and the vague unease of a world that has not yet decided how to remember its monsters. Korath survived him. He had become, in the years following the dissolution, an unlikely advocate for the new order. Not because he believed in it. Korath's conversion was political, not spiritual, and everyone knew it. But because he was intelligent enough to recognize that the new order was more stable than the old one, and that stability, properly leveraged, was a form of power that did not require anyone to die. He became the Thraxian representative to the Galactic Council. He was effective, abrasive, and deeply distrusted by almost everyone, which made him a natural politician. Admiral Chen Wei retired from the United Earth Navy on the 10th anniversary of the Kepler Corridor engagement. His retirement ceremony was held aboard the UEN Remembrance, the same ship he had commanded during the battle. He stood on the bridge surrounded by his officers, and he gave a speech that was 2 minutes long. "I have been a soldier for 40 years, he said. For 30 of those years, I prepared for a war I hoped would never come. It came. We won. And the thing I am most proud of is not that we won it. It is that we won it and then stopped. Winning is easy for the strong. Stopping is the hard part." Elera Voss understood that. She understood that the measure of a species is not what it can destroy, but what it chooses to build after the destruction is over. He paused. "I am retiring because the galaxy does not need warriors anymore. It needs builders. And I am too old and too set in my ways to become one. But you are not." He left the bridge. He went home to a small house on the coast of what used to be called British Columbia, and he lived there with his wife and his garden and his complete inability to relax. And he was content in the way that soldiers are content when they have finally been given permission to put the weapon down. Rourke stayed. Commander James Rourke, Ambassador James Rourke, as he was eventually titled, remained Earth's representative to the Galactic Council for 18 years. He was not a natural diplomat. He was blunt. He was impatient. He had a tendency to solve disagreements by staring at the disagreeing parties until they became uncomfortable enough to compromise, which was not a technique taught in any diplomatic academy, but which proved remarkably effective in a room full of species that remembered what humanity could do when diplomacy failed. He carried 2 pins in his pocket, always, the crushed one and the whole one. He never explained why he carried 2. No one asked. By the 18th year, the pins had become so much a part of him that the newer delegates assumed they were some kind of human cultural artifact, like a wedding ring or a prayer bead. And in a way they were right. The galaxy settled into something that was not peace exactly, because peace implies the absence of conflict, and conflict was as present as ever. Trade disputes, border disagreements, cultural misunderstandings, the endless friction of 183 species trying to share a galaxy without stepping on each other's equivalents of toes. But it was something that had not existed before, something that the older species recognized even if they could not name it. The way you recognize the smell of rain before the rain arrives. It was possibility, the strange, fragile, easily broken thing that occurs when beings who are different from each other decide to remain in the same room. And then, 20 years after the Kepler Corridor, the Thesari arrived. No one had heard of the Thesari. They were not in any database. They were not on any star chart. They came from beyond the mapped galaxy, from the dark space between the spiral arms where stars were rare and silence was the native language. Their fleet appeared at the edge of Council-monitored space on a Tuesday. 1,400 ships, each one larger than anything in any known navy, each one radiating energy signatures that made the monitoring station's instruments stutter and recalibrate and stutter again. The monitoring station sent an alert. The alert reached Thraxas Station in 40 minutes. Within an hour, the Galactic Council was in emergency session. Within 2 hours, the Thraxas sent a message. It was simple. It was broadcast on all frequencies. It was translated simultaneously into every known language by the Thraxas' own systems, which meant they had been listening long enough to learn, and that fact alone was more frightening than the 1,400 ships. We are the Thraxas Ascendancy. We have observed your region of space for a considerable period. We have cataloged your species, your technologies, and your military capacities. We find them adequate for our purposes. You will submit to Ascendancy governance within 30 standard days or be restructured accordingly. That was the entire message. No preamble, no introduction, no diplomatic niceties. The Thraxas communicated the way a boot communicates with an insect, briefly from above, and with no expectation of a reply. The council chamber erupted. 183 species talking at once sounded like the inside of a hive during an earthquake. Delegates shouted. Delegates whispered. The Alani clicked so fast their translators crashed. The Torvathi merchant delegation immediately began calculating the economic impact of subjugation, because Torvathi processed stress through numbers the way other species processed it through screaming. Korath stood. His voice cut through the noise the way Vraxian voices had always cut through noise. Built for battlefields. Built for command. Built for moments exactly like this. Silence. The chamber went quiet. Old habits. I have seen this before, Korath said. 20 years ago, this council sat in a different configuration and received a different threat from a different direction, and the response was the same. Panic. I participated in that panic. I advocated for war. I challenged my own commander because I believed strength was the only currency that mattered. He paused. His brace arm, the one Dravik had twisted, which had never fully healed, and which he refused to have surgically repaired because the imperfection reminded him of something he needed to remember, hung at his side. I was wrong then. I do not intend to be wrong now. This is not a Vraxian problem. This is not a human problem. This is a galactic problem, and we will address it as a galaxy. He looked at the human delegation. Rourke was already standing. He looked older. What 20 years of diplomacy had done to his face what 20 years of military service had not. Softened the edges, deepened the lines, added a layer of something that was not quite patience, but was adjacent to it. He still looked like he had been assembled from spare military parts, but the parts had been worn smooth. Earth's fleet is already mobilizing, he said, but Korath is right. This is not our fight alone. The charter is clear. Collective defense is a shared responsibility. Every member species contributes according to capability. The Thraxas have 1,400 ships, Patient Click said. She was still the Alani representative. She was ancient by Alani standards, and her clicks had slowed over the years. But her mind remained the sharpest in the chamber. Our combined military, including Earth's fleet, it numbers approximately 2,000 combat-capable vessels. The margin is narrow. The margin is always narrow, Rourke said. 20 years ago, we had 300 ships against 412 Vraxian warships. Margins don't win wars. Preparation does. And what preparation do we have against an unknown enemy with unknown technology from unknown space? Rourke reached into his pocket. He took out the 2 pins. He placed them on the speaker's floor, next to Elera Voss's name. We have each other. I know that sounds like something from a bad speech. I know it doesn't fit on a tactical display. But 20 years ago, this galaxy was a collection of conquered species ruled by fear. Today, it is a council of equals. 20 years ago, if an external threat had appeared, every species would have scrambled to save itself, and the Vraxians would have exploited the chaos. Today, we are having this conversation, all of us, in the same room, at the same level. He picked up the pins. Elera Voss died because she believed this was possible. Chen Wei fought a war to make it real. Dravik surrendered an empire to give it a chance. And every one of us, every species in this room, has spent 20 years building it. I am not going to stand here and tell you that we will definitely win. I am going to stand here and tell you that for the first time in galactic history, we have something worth fighting for together. The chamber was quiet, not the silence of fear, something else, something that had grown over 20 years in the spaces between species that had learned to sit next to each other without flinching. Nama the Cathani delegate stood, the same one, still alive, still small, still crystalline, still carrying the morning song in his body like a scar that had become a compass. I will contribute what I can, he said, which is very little. 712 people do not make an army, but we make a reason. He looked at the chamber. We are the reason this council exists, not because we are special, because we are what happens when the galaxy fails, when strength is the only value, when the small are crushed because they are small. The Thraxas look at us and see something to restructure. I look at this room and see the proof that restructuring is not the only way. He sat down. The vote was called. Not a vote on whether to fight. That was not in question. A vote on how to fight, collectively, as a council. In with every species contributing what it could, and no species left to face the dark alone. 183 votes. Unanimous. The combined galactic defense fleet assembled over the following weeks. 2,047 ships from 89 species. Human ships formed the core, still the most advanced, still carrying weapons that operated on principles most species could not replicate. But they were not alone. Thraxian dreadnoughts, redesigned, modernized, crewed by soldiers who fought under a new flag, flanked them. Torvathi logistics vessels managed supply lines with mathematical precision. Eleni communication ships provided a sensor network so fine-grained it could detect a heartbeat across a star system. Even the Cathani contributed. Their 712 people crewed a single ship, a small, crystalline vessel that served no military function. It was a broadcasting ship. Its purpose was to transmit the morning song on all frequencies, continuously, throughout the engagement. Not as a weapon, as a reminder of what was lost when the galaxy failed, a reminder of what would be lost if it failed again. Admiral Torres, Chen Wei's former tactical operations chief, now the commander of the United Earth Navy, stood on the bridge of the Elera Voss and looked at the fleet display. 2,000 ships, 89 species, the largest cooperative military force in galactic history. She opened a channel to the Thraxas fleet. This is Admiral Maria Torres of the Galactic Defense Fleet, operating under the authority of the Galactic Council. You have issued a demand for submission. We are here to issue a response. The Thraxas did not reply immediately. Their fleet hung in the dark, 1,400 ships arranged in a formation that suggested geometry more than military doctrine, as though they had organized themselves according to a mathematical principle rather than a tactical one. Then a voice, deep, resonant, carrying the weight of a species that had never been challenged because it had never encountered anything worth challenging. You are the collected remnants of a fragmented region. You have no unified command structure. You have no technological advantage. Your fleet is a patchwork of incompatible systems operated by species that, until recently, were killing each other. You are not a threat. You are a curiosity. Torres looked at her display. She looked at the patchwork fleet. She looked at the Thraxian dreadnoughts holding formation alongside human warships. She looked at the Cathani broadcasting ship, singing its morning song into the void. You're right, she said. We are a patchwork. We are a collection of species that spent most of our history fighting each other. We are fragmented. We are incompatible. We are messy and complicated, and we disagree about almost everything. She paused. But 20 years ago, a woman stood in a room full of predators and told them the truth, and they killed her for it. And her death did something that 3,000 years of empire could not. It made us realize that the only thing more dangerous than a galaxy ruled by the strong is a galaxy where the strong have no one to answer to. She leaned forward. You have 1,400 ships. We have 2,000. You have unknown technology. We have technology that dismantled the largest military empire this galaxy has ever seen. But that's not what should concern you. And what should concern us? The fact that every species in this fleet chose to be here. Not because they were conquered, not because they were ordered, not because they had no choice. Every ship behind me is crewed by beings who looked at your demand and decided freely to say no. You cannot conquer a galaxy that has learned to say no together, because you would have to break every single one of us. And we have already been broken. By each other, by ourselves. We know what breaking feels like, and we know what it feels like to put the pieces back together. She straightened. So here is Earth's response, delivered on behalf of the Galactic Council, in 183 species, and the memory of Ambassador Elera Voss, who gave her life so that we could stand here today as equals. She looked at the Thraxas fleet. 1,400 ships, unknown technology, unknown capability, unknown everything. She was not afraid, not because she was certain of victory. Certainty was a luxury that belonged to empires, and empires were finished. She was not afraid because behind her, 2,000 ships crewed by 89 species held their positions and waited. And their waiting was not the patience of prey. It was the patience of a galaxy that had finally figured out what it was. We decline your terms. If you advance, we will meet you. If you fire, we will fire back. And if you destroy us, every ship, every crew, every species in this fleet, know that others will come. It's because that is what we do. We warn the Thraxians. We are warning you. The warning is always the same. She paused. Don't make us show you what happens when you ignore it. The channel held open. The Thraxas fleet did not move. 1,400 ships hanging in the dark, facing 2,000 ships crewed by beings who should not have been allies and were anyway. Minutes passed. Then the Thraxas spoke. We will study your proposal of collective governance. We require time. Torres exhaled. Not relief. Something quieter. Something that lived in the space between a held breath and a released one. Take all the time you need. We're not going anywhere. The Thraxas fleet withdrew, not in retreat. Their formation held, their ships moving in that same mathematical precision, to knew it. But they would return to a table, knew it. But they would return to a table, not a battlefield. And when they sat down, they would sit at the same level as everyone else. On the bridge of the UN Voss, Torres looked at the fleet display. 2,000 ships, 89 species, holding formation, together. She opened a channel to all ships. This is Admiral Torres. The Thraxas have withdrawn. All units hold position until further notice. She closed the channel. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a silver pin. A circle, whole, unbroken. She had never met Elera Voss. She had been a junior officer when the ambassador died, watching the broadcast from a training facility on Mars. And she had seen the shot and the fall and the silence that followed. And she had understood in that moment, with the clarity that only the young and the furious possess, exactly what kind of galaxy she lived in and exactly what kind of galaxy she wanted to build instead. She held the pin. Below her, on the speaker's floor of Thraxas Station, transmitted live to every ship in the fleet in every world in the council, Rourke stood among the names engraved in the floor. He was 67 years old. His hair was white. His hands were steady. He looked at the chamber. Empty now except for him. The delegates had gone to their ships, their stations, their communication arrays. The business of the galaxy continued. It always continued. He looked down at the names. Elera Voss. He knelt, one knee on the cold metal, on his hand flat on her name. The same position he had taken 20 years ago. In the dark, in the silence, after the votes and the speeches and the beginning of everything that had followed. They listened, he said. He stood. He straightened his jacket. He adjusted the silver pin on his lapel. Then he walked out of the chamber, and the lights dimmed behind him, and the names glowed faintly in the dark. 3,218 of them, in scripts and symbols from 100 worlds. Unreadable and permanent and enough. The door closed. The galaxy held its breath, and somewhere in the space between the stars, A morning song played on.